Rome did not shape its empire through courage alone. What truly sustained it was debt. We usually imagine Roman legions as honorable, disciplined, and indestructible warriors. But behind every polished helmet and every sharp gladius was an incredibly expensive and complex system. Thousands of soldiers needed provisions, ammunition, roads, and pay. Horses needed feed. Siege engines required materials and labor, and all of this shared one common element: money, and an excessive amount of it. So how did Rome manage centuries of conquest financially? And does this still matter today? Because when you look a little closer at Rome's war strategy, you notice this. War wasn't just displayed on battlefields, it was hidden inside the financial system, and once that system gained momentum, it was impossible to stop. Growth was not a choice, it was an economic necessity. Sound familiar? Let's go back. In the early years of the Republic, Rome's army was a citizen army. If you owned land, you could be called to serve. Soldiers brought their own equipment and expected to return to their farms once the campaign ended. But as Rome grew, wars became much longer and fronts much farther away. Grabbing a spear and heading out for a few months was no longer enough. More specialized soldiers were needed. At that point, the state began to centralize military financing. Soldiers were paid wages called stipendium. It wasn't much, but it was enough to buy loyalty. The real turning point, however, was this. Conquest itself became a revenue model. Each new province meant new taxes, new slaves, new mines, and new tribute. War financed more war. A self-sustaining loop had been created. But this is where the dangerous part begins. Rome did not rely solely on taxes. It borrowed. Especially during long and costly wars like the Punic Wars against Carthage, the Republic took on large public debts from wealthy elites. These elites were the equites, the rising financial class. This money was not a patriotic duty. It was an investment. And investors expect returns. Interest payments, tax collection rights, trade monopolies in newly conquered lands. In other words, war turned into a profitable business. And the more profitable it was, the more wars followed. Sound familiar? Over time, this militarized economy changed everything. Political power shifted to generals who could promise spoils. Senators became shareholders in violence. Private contractors known as publicani took over everything from logistics to tax collection, skimming enormous fortunes along the way. It was military-industrial capitalism dressed in a toga. But the cost kept rising. To pay soldiers and creditors, the state constantly needed new revenue. When conquests slowed or rebellions drained the treasury, Rome turned to the oldest trick in the book: debasing the currency. During the reign of Emperor Nero, the silver content of the denarius was quietly reduced. Over the next 2 centuries, emperors continued this practice. What was once a reliable currency became an empty promise. The result? Inflation. Loss of trust. By the 3rd century, Rome's monetary system was in free fall. So who benefited during this time? The wealthy. Senators and equites protected their wealth in land, slaves, and foreign assets. The people, meanwhile, were paid in devalued currency, burdened with heavy taxes, and conscripted into the army. This was not just a military collapse, it was a monetary collapse. Now stop and look around. States are running massive budget deficits. Wars are financed through debt. Central banks quietly erode the value of money to cover the gaps. Who profits from defense contracts? Who gets rich off interest? Whose wallet does inflation burn? You already know the answer. Rome shows us this. An economy built on violent expansion eventually hits a wall. There are no lands left to conquer, no resources left to extract, and the system turns inward on its own people. Taxes increase, money loses even more value. Control tightens. Bread and entertainment for the masses, fortified villas for the elites. Today we don't call it tribute, we call it taxes. We call it monetary expansion, we call it monetary policy. But the mechanics are the same. That's why economic history matters. These aren't old stories, they are warning signs. You can't completely escape the system. But you don't have to play it blindly either. Start seeing the pattern, follow the money, ask who lends, who profits, and who pays the bill. Because history tells us this: empires don't fall when the gates are breached, But when the math stops working, if this gave you a new perspective, don't forget to follow. History always provides the answers. I'll show you where to look.